So this past week has been Holocaust Education Week. It's an important time each year when we focus on remembering and on learning more about what happens when good people don't stand up for what's right. It's a weighty subject and by no means an easy subject. When I think about it, it's also, for me, a problematic subject. And why do I say that? For a lot of people, maybe for some of you here tonight, it raises a really important question. Where was God during the Shoah? Religious philosophers have a nice academic-sounding name for this question. They call it the problem of evil. And it covers a lot of different situations, not just the Holocaust, although if there was ever a poster boy for the problem of evil, I think the Shoah would be it. The problem of evil is also sometimes characterized by the question, why do bad things happen to good people? Our scriptures have, I think, a lot to say on this subject. For example, there's the entire book of Job, which is a kind of a treatise on this problem. It shows us that this question is a very old and a very important one. So I said that this question is problematic for me. In what way? Well, let me explain. The problem of evil flows from a tacit assumption that a lot of people make about God and about humanity's relationship with God. In people's minds, there's a sort of a divine equation that describes this relationship. When this equation doesn't hold for some reason, people find it really difficult, and in some cases, it can even shake people's faith, sometimes destroying it altogether. I believe that there isn't just one divine equation that people have in the back of their minds. I think there can be several, but most of them still have this same fundamental problem. And that problem is that when the equation fails, people come to the wrong conclusion. Let's work through an example to show you what I mean. Instead of using the problem of evil, though, let's pick one with a more positive connotation. This should illustrate my point just as well, without having to dwell too much on an uncomfortable subject like the Shoah. Here's a divine equation that I think a lot of people have in their minds. So how does this divine equation work? On the right-hand side is our goal, the objective we're striving for, the meaning of life, if you will. In our culture, I think you'll agree that a lot of people are focused on achieving the good life, whatever that means to each person. For some, it might be happiness. For some, it might be economic or professional success. Maybe a nice house in a good neighborhood, with good schools for our kids who grow up and dutifully call us every week. On the left-hand side of the equation are the things that will lead you to this goal. The left-hand side says that if you live life the right way, God will reward you. It's not like this is some kind of modern North American ideal that we've made up either. After all, it's right there in Torah and all throughout the Tanakh, blessings and curses. It's what a lot of the prophets talk about all the time. So I said before that I think that there's a problem with this divine equation. What's wrong with it? Actually, I think there are a few things wrong with it, but let's start with how it can lead us to the wrong conclusion. Let's say that somehow you feel like you haven't really achieved the good life. Maybe your job's not going well. Maybe your back is giving you a bad time. Maybe you feel alone or forgotten or left behind. You take a look at your divine equation and you try to understand what's gone wrong. The right-hand side has come up 0, so you break out your grade school arithmetic and you have to come to one conclusion or another. You think, maybe my good behavior isn't up to snuff. But that can't be it. After all, you come to shul, you clean your chametz crumbs out at Passover, you're a good person, better at least than Mr. You-know-who down the street, who somehow has a much better job than you, and a good back, and lots of friends who are always coming over and taking up all the parking on the street. So if it's not you, then that leaves only one conclusion. Maybe what you're left with is a crisis of faith. That's a really big problem, and not the only problem with this divine equation. Something else that's wrong with it is that it represents a kind of idolatry. How so? Idolatry is about bowing down to the work of your own hands. It's about setting God aside and putting your faith in yourself, whether that's literally a statue that you've made with your own hands or whether it's more figurative. It's about trying to take control that you don't really have. Another problem with this equation is that it doesn't pass the real-life sniff test, by which I mean in particular that it's much too simplistic. How many of you would say, having reached whatever age you've reached, that you've come to the conclusion that life is really just as simple as this equation? In the end, though, the main problem with this divine equation is that the right-hand side has the wrong term. In other words, the whole equation misses the point. If that's the case, what does belong on the right-hand side of our equation? I think the answer can be found right in our own Sidurim. There's a reading which is part of the Hoda'ah after Modima Nachnulach, the prayer for giving thanks. It's on the bottom of page 61, and it says that we haven't come into this world for strife, hatred, or anger, that our purpose in life is to know God. That's what belongs on the right-hand side of our divine equation. But what does the left-hand side look like? Well, if the point is to bring us together with God, it makes sense that we should be in there somehow, and God needs to be in the equation too. But we also said that our previous divine equation was much too simple. Life is much more complicated, so we need to make some kind of allowance for that. I know that we said our good behavior was part of the failed divine equation, but we know that we can't take our behavior out of the equation altogether. During the high holidays, we spend a lot of time reflecting on how we conduct ourselves in the world. We ask for forgiveness for the times when we've missed the mark, and we rededicate ourselves to doing better in the coming year. I think we need to include our best efforts in our divine equation. At the same time, you don't need to spend very much time reading the news to see that there are a lot of people behaving pretty badly almost anywhere you look. No matter how much good you try to do in the world, it seems like somebody's out there trying to undo it. I like to put this under the label, people are jerks, by which I mean that every one of us, myself included, maybe myself especially, ask Sandy, she'll tell you, we can be jerks at times. In our tradition, we call this the Yetzer Ra, the inclination to evil, and it works against our other inclination, the Yetzer Tov, the inclination to good. These two inclinations are what give us our free will, which is all important. The unfortunate fact of the matter is, though, that far too many people are much too susceptible to their Yetzer Ra, so we better account for that in our new equation. We also know that what we do does matter, and we need to take responsibility for our actions. At the same time, there are all kinds of things that we will just never be able to control. So let's factor these into our new divine equation too. So here we have it. We now have a divine equation that focuses us on what really matters, while taking into consideration personal responsibility and all the real-world things that frustrate, confuse, and disappoint us. What I like about this new divine equation is that it gives us agency in the world. The better our best efforts are and the more positive the consequences of our actions are, the better the outcome is. At the same time, there's something else about this divine equation that makes it much better than our first version. Let's say that we've been doing our best and doing good things in the world. No matter how much we do or how much we accomplish, it seems like it's always an uphill battle. Let's plug that into our equation. Working that through, you quickly come to this conclusion. What you do does matter, and the consequences of your actions are meaningful. But what our new divine equation is telling us is that even when things go terribly, terribly wrong, what matters most is you and God. This is illustrated pretty vividly in the book of Job, which really is one of the most fascinating stories in Tanakh. While our first failed divine equation leads us far too often, perhaps even inevitably, to a crisis of faith, the story of Job teaches us that no matter what happens, we need to hang on to our faith in God. On our worst days, our divine equation comes down to this. God is there for us to be a constant in our lives. Even on our worst days, you can still achieve the goal, what's most important, the right-hand side. All you need to do is to make sure you don't take yourself out of the equation. Shabbat Shalom.